Simulation. Theory moment of joy. Every hardship and every thought exists within a simulation. Simulation theory proposes that our reality might not be the fundamental one, but a creation of advanced beings or systems. It suggests that what we perceive as physical and concrete might be no more real than the worlds inside a video game. The implications are staggering, especially when considering suffering. If our lives are simulated, does suffering hold the same weight? And what does it mean for how we understand pain ethics and existence simulation? Theory gained prominence through thinkers like Nick Bostrom, who argued that if advanced civilizations develop the ability to simulate realities indistinguishable from their own, and if they choose to create many such simulations, it becomes statistically likely that we are living in one. While this idea might sound like science fiction, it rests on logical possibilities. The future development of computing power, the motivations of simulated beings, and the indistinguishability of simulated experiences from real ones. If we are indeed living in a simulation, the nature of suffering becomes deeply complicated in a physical reality. Pain and suffering are tied to biological processes, damage to the body, illness, or emotional distress. These experiences carry weight because they are directly connected to survival and well-being. But if our reality is simulated, suffering could be seen as something programmed into our experience. This raises the unsettling question: is suffering necessary in a simulated world, or is it intentionally designed into the system? One possibility is that suffering exists because it adds depth and realism to the simulation. If the beings creating the simulation intended to replicate a reality as close to their own as possible, suffering might be an inescapable part of that design. After all, struggle, loss, and hardship are integral to the human experience, shaping our choices, relationships, and sense of meaning. Without suffering, life might lack the contrast that makes joy and fulfillment meaningful. In this sense, suffering could be viewed as a deliberate feature of the simulation, not a flaw. Another perspective is that suffering, but whether we could serve an entirely different purpose, one unknown to us, if we are part of an experiment or a study conducted by the beings who created the simulation. Suffering might be a variable they are observing. It could help them understand how simulated beings respond to adversity, or how systems of morality and resilience develop under challenging conditions. In this scenario, our pain might have meaning, but not one we can comprehend within the limits of the simulation. This leads to profound ethical questions about the beings or entities running the simulation. If they have the power to eliminate suffering, are they morally obligated to do so? In human terms, creating a world filled with pain might seem cruel, yet it's also possible that the creators see the simulation differently, as something akin to art, a learning tool, or a system that transcends human notions of morality. Their perspective might render the concept of cruelty meaningless. The possibility of simulated suffering also forces us to reevaluate our sense of agency. In a simulated world, are our actions and choices truly our own, or are they predetermined by the system? If suffering is pre-programmed, do we have any responsibility for how we experience it, or how we alleviate the suffering of others? These questions challenge the foundations of ethics and free will, leaving us to grapple with whether simulated beings can hold moral accountability for those who find simulation theory plausible. The implications for how we approach suffering in daily life are complex. On one hand, viewing suffering as part of a simulation might diminish its emotional impact. If pain is merely a construct, perhaps it doesn't need to be taken so seriously. On the other hand, the realization that suffering is programmed into the system could deepen its poignancy, as it becomes a reminder of our lack of control over the fundamental nature of our reality. Yet even within the framework of simulation, theory suffering retains a profound immediacy. whether real or simulated. Pain feels real to the one experiencing it. A broken bone, the loss of a loved one, or the sting of rejection affects us deeply, regardless of whether it arises from biological processes or lines of code. This highlights a paradox of simulation theory, even if our reality is an illusion. Our experiences are not diminished. They remain powerful, vivid, and deeply meaningful to us. Simulation theory also raises the possibility that we are not passive participants, but active creators within the simile. If we, philosophical simism, crossing the threshold of philosophical pessimism, reveals a perspective where life is fundamentally marked by hardship, suffering, and unfulfilled longings. This unvarnished outlook forms the essence of philosophical pessimism, a school of thought that opposes the optimistic narratives commonly attached to human existence. Rather than serving to dishearten or dissuade, philosophical pessimism seeks to confront the stark truths of life with unfiltered clarity. It urges individuals to scrutinize their beliefs about progress, happiness, and life's intrinsic meaning. The roots of philosophical pessimism are often traced to the German thinker Arthur Schopenhauer. For Schopenhauer, the fundamental source of human suffering is the will to live, an unceasing, insatiable force that propels all living beings forward. This drive results in perpetual striving, where each fulfilled desire gives birth to another, perpetuating a cycle of frustration and ephemeral gratification. Schopenhauer maintained that such relentless pursuit is not only exhausting, but ultimately futile, as it ensures persistent dissatisfaction and distress. Schopenhauer's bleak perspective extended beyond personal struggles, asserting that suffering is an inherent part of existence itself. Life's fabric is interwoven with affliction. Predators hunt their prey, diseases ravage bodies, and mortality looms over all. While fleeting moments of pleasure and joy exist, they are transient and frequently come at the expense of others. To Schopenhauer, these brief respites did not validate the worth of existence, but instead served as temporary pauses in an otherwise grim reality. Another significant figure in philosophical pessimism is Friedrich Nietzsche, who, despite being primarily linked with existentialism, engaged deeply with pessimistic ideas. Nietzsche challenged Schopenhauer's resignation to suffering by advocating for an embrace of life's turmoil. He acknowledged existence's harshness, yet argued that individuals must affirm life's struggles and chaos as fundamental aspects of being. For Nietzsche, recognizing life's difficulties should not lead to despair, but rather encourage a reassessment of how one confronts and interprets adversity. Philosophical pessimism also finds resonance in the musings of Romanian philosopher Emil Cioran, who explored suffering with a deeply personal lens. Cioran's writings reflect on the absurdity of existence, the inevitability of death, and the fragility of human aspirations. He characterized life as an ongoing battle against despair, where moments of realization often expose the void beneath our pursuits. For Cioran, pessimism was not a problem to be solved, but a perspective that clarified life's realities. One of philosophical pessimism's most compelling elements is its critique of progress. While many subscribe to the belief in continual advancement, whether technological, societal, or personal, pessimists challenge this assumption. They argue that while circumstances may shift, the fundamental nature of human suffering remains unchanged. Technological innovations may ease certain burdens, yet they introduce new forms of dissatisfaction. Likewise, societal development may enhance living conditions, but it can never eradicate existential suffering or the inevitability of mortality. Philosophical pessimism also questions the pursuit of happiness as life's ultimate goal. It contends that the relentless chase for happiness often results in greater disappointment, as happiness itself is fleeting and elusive. Instead of fixating on an idealized state of contentment, pessimists advocate for accepting life's imperfections and constraints. This acceptance does not imply surrender, but rather learning to navigate existence without the constant pressure to attain ultimate fulfillment. One way philosophical pessimism provides solace is by emphasizing solidarity in suffering. Recognizing that pain and struggle are universal fosters a sense of connection and compassion. If suffering is an unavoidable aspect of life, then shared vulnerability can become a wellspring of empathy and understanding. This viewpoint encourages individuals to support one another, not because life is perfect, but because its challenges are endured collectively. Philosophical pessimism further serves as a counterbalance to overly idealistic or simplistic perceptions of life. In a world that frequently glorifies positivity and success, pessimism acts as a grounding force, reminding us that struggle is an intrinsic and valid component of existence. Rather than succumbing to despair, this realism enables individuals to face life's hardships without illusion or denial. In this way, pessimism provides perspective, preventing disillusionment in the face of adversity. Critics of philosophical pessimism often dismiss it as defeatist or excessively negative, arguing that focusing on suffering overlooks life's beauty, joy, and potential. However, pessimists refute this characterization. They do not deny the existence of beauty and joy, but refuse to ignore the suffering that accompanies them. For philosophical pessimists, acknowledging the full scope of human experience, including its darker dimensions, is essential to genuinely understanding and appreciating life. Philosophical pessimism does not offer comforting illusions or easy solutions. It does not promise a brighter future or a hidden meaning behind suffering. Instead, it demands an unflinching engagement with reality, unclouded by false hope. This confrontation, though difficult, can also be liberating. By relinquishing unrealistic expectations, one can approach life on its own terms, discovering meaning in the act of living itself. Ultimately, philosophical pessimism is not a doctrine of despair, but a philosophy of truth. It urges individuals to observe life without averting their gaze, to acknowledge suffering without seeking to obscure it. In doing so, it fosters a deeper comprehension of what it means to be human, a complex interplay of pain, joy, hope, and doubt, all bound together in the relentless experience of existence. Negative utilitarianism. Utilitarianism envisions a world where the ultimate moral goal is not to maximize happiness, but to minimize suffering. This principle forms the foundation of negative utilitarianism, a striking and controversial ethical framework. Unlike traditional utilitarianism, which prioritizes increasing overall happiness, negative utilitarianism centers on suffering as the primary moral concern, arguing that reducing or eliminating pain should take precedence over pursuing pleasure. The roots of negative utilitarianism lie in the recognition that suffering possesses unique significance. While happiness can enhance life, suffering often exerts a far deeper and more urgent moral demand. A fleeting moment of pleasure may be valuable, but pain, whether physical or emotional, can dominate a person's existence. Philosopher Karl Popper, one of the early proponents of this view, argued that avoiding misery and suffering should take priority over increasing happiness, as alleviating pain directly improves the quality of life for those affected. Negative utilitarianism challenges us to critically assess the value placed on happiness versus the importance of alleviating pain. In many situations, focusing on reducing suffering appears both straightforward and intuitive. Providing food and shelter to those in need, offering medical care to the sick, or addressing mental health crises are clear examples of actions aligning with this framework. These interventions directly alleviate suffering and improve well-being. However, negative utilitarianism extends beyond individual cases, prompting reflection on broader, even existential concerns. One of the more controversial aspects of negative utilitarianism is its implication that if suffering outweighs happiness in the world, drastic actions might be morally justified to prevent further suffering. Some interpretations suggest that if life inevitably entails suffering, preventing future lives from coming into existence might be the moral course of action. This idea aligns with anti-natalist philosophies, which argue against procreation on the grounds that it prevents potential suffering. Such arguments force consideration of uncomfortable questions regarding the nature of existence and the ethics of creating life in a world where pain is unavoidable. Critics of negative utilitarianism often highlight its potential for extreme conclusions. They argue that an excessive focus on eliminating suffering could lead to moral decisions that overlook the value of happiness, joy, and fulfillment. If taken to an extreme, negative utilitarianism might justify actions aimed at eliminating all sentient life to prevent future suffering, a scenario raising serious ethical and practical concerns. While most negative utilitarians reject such drastic interpretations, these possibilities reveal the inherent tensions within the philosophy. Another challenge for negative utilitarianism lies in the complexity of measuring suffering. Pain is subjective and varies greatly among individuals and contexts. What one person finds unbearable, another might endure with relative ease. This variability complicates efforts to apply negative utilitarianism consistently, particularly on a societal level. How should the suffering of different individuals or groups be weighed? How does one balance immediate pain against the potential for long-term well-being? Despite these challenges, negative utilitarianism offers valuable insights into ethical decision-making. It compels us to prioritize reducing suffering, particularly in situations where resources are limited and difficult choices must be made. In global health, for instance, this framework can guide policies that focus on treating the most severe illnesses or alleviating the most pressing hardships. By centering suffering, negative utilitarianism ensures that the most urgent needs are addressed first, providing a clear moral imperative to assist those in the greatest distress. Negative utilitarianism also invites reconsideration of our relationship with suffering on a personal level. It challenges cultural narratives that glorify suffering as a path to growth or achievement, instead emphasizing the moral importance of compassion and care. By recognizing the weight of suffering, we can cultivate a greater sense of empathy and responsibility toward others, striving to create a world where unnecessary pain is minimized. Ultimately, negative utilitarianism does not deny the value of happiness, but underscores the profound moral urgency of suffering. It calls for confronting the darker aspects of existence with honesty and resolve, reminding us that even small acts of kindness and care can make a significant difference. While the philosophy may raise difficult questions and invite criticism, it highlights a deeply resonant truth. Alleviating suffering is a fundamental and deeply human goal, transcending cultural and philosophical divides. It urges us not to abandon the pursuit of happiness, but to ensure that in that pursuit, we do not lose sight of those who suffer the most.